Hello, everybody. Today we have Miss Sylvia Jablonski. She is the CEO of Defiance ETFs. Thank you so much for joining me for this interview today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I guess the first question is, what do you do in your job specifically?
Yeah, so I am currently the CEO and the CIO of Defiance ETFs. And ETFs, for anybody who isn't familiar, stands for Exchange Traded Funds. So what we do is we basically create these funds that are made up of different stocks, and they track different themes. They have sort of different purposes. We have leverage funds, thematic ETFs, income funds, and we essentially create them and we bring them to market, and then people buy them. And so my role is kind of managing the nuts and bolts of all of that. So it could be everything from, monitoring the trading side to monitoring the secondary market. So funds have these, intricacies where you have market makers, the, authorized participants that actually create the funds and help them trade and keep the spreads in line and create liquidity. So, I work with those types of guys. That's called capital markets. I am a contributor to CNBC, Bloomberg, and Fox. So I go on TV a lot and talk about the economy, background in economics and finance. So I tend to be, or try to be at least, helpful in terms of providing market views to investors. I speak to investors. I speak to, clients, to people like yourself that have questions about ETFs. And really just like the nuts and bolts, like everything you can think of, the operations of the firm, working with sales and distribution, marketing, kind of strategic vision, things like this. So we're a startup, which is why that sounds like a lot, right? So I have, a former life where I kind of had like a specific role and a specific job, but when you're the CEO of a startup, you kind of do everything, right? So, my team and I are just wearing different hats and trying to launch a successful fund company.
That sounds great. So also as a CIO, you also you're choosing the stuff that goes into the funds, is that right? Or is that not specifically what you do as well?
Well, yes and no. So my team and I, all of us take, give credit to like the whole team because we sit around and talk about different ideas every single day. We whiteboard, everything. We have brilliant ideas one day, and the next day we realize like that's a terrible idea. And then some idea that we thought was terrible ends up being like the big winner. So there's a lot of, kind of R&D that goes on behind the scenes. So what we do is we have an idea, and we kind of shake that out and create like a skeleton of what we think a fund should be. And then we work with index providers. And in the ETF world, a lot of ETFs are passive. And what that means is like a hedge fund makes really active decisions every single day. They buy and sell stocks, they change their strategy, they kind of do whatever they want, and you don't really know what they're doing. You're happy if they have good returns, you're unhappy if they don't. So maybe like directionally what they're doing, but you don't have the day-to-day transparency. Whereas with ETF products that are passive, we actually create rules and we put them up on our website. And so we work with index providers to take our idea and form it into something that's tradable. And then, you'll kind of have rules. So exactly what we're doing, when we rebalance, when we, add a different category to a fund, and things like that. So it's a combination of like doing it ourselves and working with partners.
That sounds great. So you were talking at the end about how it was slightly different than a hedge fund, right?
Yeah.
So I guess could you also expand maybe how is it different from something like an investment bank like Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs, just for people out there, because sometimes it can get a little tricky with all the terminology, hedge fund, ETFs, investment banks. So what's like
Yeah,
the
sure.
difference, would you say?
Yeah, so banks are larger institutions that do many things, right? They trade different products, meaning they trade like bonds and stocks and private equity and credit and emerging markets, all sorts of things. And they tend to be the names that you're familiar with, like the Goldman Sachs's, the Morgan Stanley's, Deutsche Banks, things like that of the world. And hedge funds are pooled assets essentially. So people essentially write people or institutions can write a check to, like a Paul Tudor Jones or, Davidson Kempner, one of these big hedge funds, and they manage their money. They have portfolio managers that manage the money. So ETFs are kind of like mutual funds for the next generation. So, mutual funds started because like if you're an investor and you know nothing about the markets, but you should be in them, right? Like on the most basic level, you might say something like, I want exposure to the market. So what does that mean, right? You want S&P 500 exposure, probably. And you can't go out and buy 500 stocks. That's very inefficient. So, many, many years ago, like well before your time, well before my time, mutual fund companies came out and essentially, pulled all of these stocks together and they put them in a fund wrapper. And then instead of dealing with a person or, like a hedge fund or a bank, these products just trade on the stock market. So you can have your Robinhood account, your Schwab, SoFi, wherever you trade, and you just buy it, right? But what happened was that ETFs kind of like brought this to the future. And what they did is the exchange traded fund wrapper is the same thing as a mutual fund, except it's usually a lot cheaper and it trades intraday. So with a mutual fund, you buy the symbol whenever you want, but you're getting filled at the NAV, and you can't trade it intraday basically, or you don't have any price discovery intraday. With an ETF, it trades like a stock. So it's pricing all day long. You can buy it and sell it whenever you want. Like mutual fund fees used to be 1-2%. Some ETFs are even free now. Some of them are, less than 1%. So it just made trading really easy. But the difference is it democratized institutional. And when I mean institutional, like it democratized hedge fund products, bank products for us, right? For me, for you, for everybody. Like if we want to buy it, we just, put it into our trading account. And, we don't have to pay like a hedge fund to run our money, basically, in that kind of thing. But they're completely different. And hedge funds use ETFs actually as well within their strategies, and banks use ETFs. And so there is an overlap. And then there are actually ETFs that track hedge fund strategies too. So but the main difference is like you can buy it for buy a share of something for $20 on an exchange, whereas a hedge fund, you might have to have like a couple $1 million and you're paying a portfolio manager.
And I guess like another great thing about that is, we're always taught like, oh, you want to diversify your portfolio, right, as much as possible. So ETFs, is so many different aspects, so many different stocks and whatever. So it's a great way to diversify your portfolio. So
That's a great point. That's a great point. And then if you don't want to diversify, like if you want a little bit of diversification, you can also like backdoor your way into, like, Nvidia used to be a really expensive stock, right? And everybody wanted to own Nvidia. I mean, now it's had a split or whatever, so it's buyable, but you could also use an ETF that has like a huge position in Nvidia, and then, the other few names that kind of tend to track the market or track that name as it moves, allowed people to buy AI for $20 or something like that. So.
All right. So what are your, like, where did you go to school, your education, I guess your skill requirements that allowed you to become the CEO? Because obviously it's a very prestigious position. So what would you say were you could just go over what school you went to if you're comfortable sharing, what specific technical skills you had.
Yeah, sure. So my background is economics and finance, and I went to Boston College. I did econ and finance there, and then I did a master's, and then I did an MBA at Fordham when I moved to New York. And my whole kind of, so I always loved finance. I was always really into it. So even when I was like young, I would sit at the dinner table and talk with my parents about like stocks. My dad was always reading the Wall Street Journal, and I just kind of, realized that like, hey, if I get into this, I can make my own money even as a kid, and before I have a job and that kind of stuff. And so I always just like had an interest and a passion for it. And then I studied it and ended up here. But what I would say though is that some of the, school, like, I went to Boston College, the recruiting there is great. It's a great school for networking. You kind of you have great job opportunities coming out of there, whether it's at banks or private equity or whatever it might be. But what I would say, just like in my experience over the years, I've worked with people from like the most elite schools to schools that maybe you haven't heard of, or there's, kind of like not the classic top 50 schools or whatever it might be. And I don't think you can I don't think you could take away from anyone who's like hungry and ambitious. And so I would say that to be able to be a CEO, it's not so much schooling. Like you have to have that background for sure. But I think you have to have, tenacity. I think you have to be flexible. I think you have to be the type of person who wants to learn from every single person you work with, over the years, and learn on your own outside of school, because it's so different. Like there's so many kind of like experiences and things that you learn along the way that allow you to do this job. And a lot of times you're learning on the job when new things come up. So I think it's more of like, maybe a personality. Like, of course you need some background, right? You have to have an aptitude for math and markets and, finance and stuff like that. But I think it's as much hard work and ambition as it is where you go to school.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess next question would be, what is a day in your life like as a CEO? So I guess maybe it's kind of a hard question to answer, but maybe you could start off like, what's your morning routine? And go from there.
Sure. My morning routine is to hit the gym. I'm somebody who like has to work out to get my day started, and that gets the brain and the brain going. I have two little kids, right? So that's part of my routine too, making sure that they're getting started and ready for their day. And then it's like scanning all the news. This is well before the market opens, by the way. My wake up time is about 5 a.m. So I have a lot of time before the market opens. But I just look through all the news, global news, different types of asset class news, politics, all that kind of stuff. Just have a sense of what I'm in for that day in terms of what's going to happen in the market. And then a lot of times I get asked to be on TV a lot. And so, I always just want to be prepared for my day. But and then I kind of get into work, and it's just, kind of like scanning our funds where each fund sat, what was the percentage move the other day, any trading complications, any questions from clients that we have to get to. We usually have a team meeting and we go through, again, when you work at kind of, I'll call it like a, startup, smaller type of firm. Things like, your budget is something that you review all the time. When you work for a big bank or a private equity firm, you literally never think about it because they're just kind of highly profitable. And if they want to run a marketing campaign, they can. If they want to try something new, they can, so for us, it's like, where are we at? What's the budget? Can we do this? Can we do that? Then we usually have like a team marketing meeting, and we talk about how we're going to promote, how we're going to, educate, how we're going to reach people like you. Like, are you guys on Snapchat or Reddit? Like, what are you guys doing? Where should we shift? We're always kind of, looking through things like that. And then it's just like any kind of operational compliance trading issues throughout the day. So that's kind of it.
So would you say that this job really demands you to work on the weekends a lot, or you have to stay after hours a lot? How does that look like for you?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. So when I started in banking, I started on like a global equity derivatives desk, right? So that means like, I'll call it like kind of complex financial instruments that track stocks and are not actually stocks, right? So when you work at a bank out of school and you do one of these, like, if you end up at like a Goldman or Morgan or Deutsche, whatever it is, and you do one of these like rotations, or you end up on a desk, you have like you put in pretty good hours. You probably put in like 10 to 12-hour days. But it's fixed, I mean, here and there you have to like go out and entertain your clients and things like this, but they're pretty fixed hours. And then I think if you go to work, as you become more senior, obviously you have a little more flexibility. You can leave a little bit earlier. You're not kind of like trying to make a good impression and that kind of thing. Like, you want to work your butt off and obviously always make a good impression, but you're not sort of like vying to show, to earn your seat that very first year. Right. So you have a little more flexibility, but usually other things come into play. Like you're, kind of expected to be a leader. You're expected to kind of like travel more, see clients. So there's different demands, but I would say that, for the most part, your day to day is like a 10 to 12-hour day. With a startup, it's so different, and you're betting on yourself. So when you work for a large institution and you stay there for a long time, you have a lot of financial security, you have great benefits, like you're probably doing well financially and everything is kind of fine, and you know what your day is like. When you go to a startup, unless you're like super well funded, but even then, you're probably slashing your salary. You probably have, fewer kind of like benefits and less flexibility, but the difference is like you're betting on yourself. So the answer to that question is like, I'm willing to work whatever it takes to bet on myself and my partners and my team. We're willing to do whatever it takes to make this company successful. And so it feels a whole lot different, right? I would say that I do work around the clock. I love it though. And it's for me, it's for my partners. Like we're building something that belongs to us. So it doesn't feel like, oh man, here I am sitting at the desk. It's like, we're our own bosses. So if we want to leave the desk, that's fine. But we might, the company might not like grow or something might not happen. So what I would say though, is, so yeah, we're all connected. We're constantly talking even on the weekends, but the upside is also that when you have a startup, we're all working remotely. If I want to take my kids to school or like read them go to class and read them a book that day or something, I can do that and then kind of do the work later at night too. There's no, supervisor, boss, team leader group, like the things you have at big institutions. So there's pros and cons to both, but yeah, I think if you get to a point where you can like learn enough so that you can go and try to do it by yourself, it's very rewarding.
I think that's really interesting, like the different cultures. I mean, really, when you're working
Yeah.
for a startup, you're working for yourself. So it's like kind of I don't know, like the saying, like you love the job, it doesn't feel like work anymore, right? So if you love what
It's,
you're doing,
yeah,
it's like this is your thing, this is something you built. So it's however much I put into it, however much I'm gonna get back. So that's really,
yeah.
that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And if you don't like it, like you're probably really doing something wrong because you started it, right? So you can just stop. But I think about that quote once and then I recently heard something else and I can't think about it was I can't remember who said it. It was like a hedge fund guy that said it's not true. Like if you love what you do, you won't work a day in your life. It's absolutely not true. Like you'll work so much harder than everybody works and whatever. But I think like the psychology behind it, I completely agree with. Like if you love it, it motivates you every day. Like I absolutely love what I do. I want my company to be successful. Like we're all fully in it. Even relationships are different. Like when you work in large institutions, like you have friendships and camaraderie and teams, but when your livelihood depends on another person, it's also another level of like just loyalty and partnership and just trust. And I love that. I don't know if you play sports, but it almost reminds me of like playing sports in high school, right? It just feels like everything. Your teammates are like you live and die for each other, right? And that's how I feel like our startup feels anyway. Being a smaller one.
Yeah, I do play. I play varsity soccer, but yeah, I definitely
Nice.
relate to what
Yeah.
you're saying. That feeling of camaraderie. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you were talking a little bit about where you started on the desk. So I guess as a follow-up question, what was your career trajectory like coming out of college and then looking for work? And then I guess could you go through like a timeline of your first job and then where you are now and like what you learned along the way or like important, standout moments?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that I did, which a lot of young people do now, but when I was younger, people thought I was kind of like crazy. I started interning like the first day that I went to college. Like I was already thinking about my first job, right? And and I think that that's great. What I would say is like if I could tell my old self, I'd probably say like just chill a little bit and enjoy it a little bit more because I worked as much as I was in school. It was like kind of crazy, um but I do think that making connections when you're in college, doing internships, meeting different people is super important. So what did I learn along the way? Like through those internships, you know, I tried to intern at different places or with different people and tried to learn different things. And then I kind of got a sense of like which path I liked, right? Because finance means so many things. You have back office, you have middle office, front office, private equity, hedge fund, bank. Like there's so many different, loan, private wealth, like all this type of stuff. And so I learned pretty quickly that I like stocks and markets. And, I was fascinated with like hedge funds and what they did. And so my career trajectory was kind of like, getting on a derivatives desk where I was learning how to like trade and work on trades with hedge funds. And then ETFs became popular. I was working on financial instruments for those types of companies. And then one of the clients pretty much asked me to, join them. And then for like, 13 years, I worked at this company that grew from like, 0 to 30 billion during the time I was there. And I got to do everything from, being a kid growing up there, sales, trading, capital markets, research, things like this. But what did I learn along the way? I think, looking back on it, I don't think I realized it at the time, but always like if I can give any advice, I guess it's like always ask questions, try to get to know the people whose jobs you want to have and sit with them and talk with them, ask them if they have time to show you something. Like when I worked on when I was super young out of college, I worked on, one particular desk and I was always asking the portfolio managers if I could like, hey, can I sit with you at the close and just like see what you're doing? And, so I think just talking to people, being curious, letting people know you and kind of like who you are and your ambition will help a lot because it's hard to move around at banks. It's hard to get promoted. It's hard to have a career these days. It's super competitive, right? So I think those things really stand out. And then, kind of the same thing with my next job. Like I worked at, an ETF provider, and I learned a lot about ETFs and leverage and things like this, but all of our clients were like banks. So I always made and had relationships with, the different banks that we worked with and the different vendors and clients and investors and things like that. Like, be inquisitive, be curious, always be nice. Don't be arrogant. If you mess up, admit it. You know what I mean? If you do something awesome, don't gloat about it. Like they're just like, I think like, it's funny because there's a trader that I work with often, and I always steal his line. He has this on his like Bloomberg screen, and it says, "Be humble or be humbled." So I think always be humble, but also be hungry and curious. And yeah, I can't say enough though. Like I've given so many young people internships that are like younger in college now, and they haven't been able to find them just because like they call me and they say, I can't find an internship. It's impossible. Nobody wants to hire a freshman, but like I'll do research for you for 3 weeks and whatever. And then, we end up keeping in touch with these people and end up like helping them get jobs or hiring them. And so being proactive and talking a lot, as you can see, I talk. I think it helps.
No, that's fine. The more you talk, the better, because
Yeah.
I'm learning here. So I guess when you made that jump from having that desk job and then working on the startup, what was
Yeah.
that feeling like? I know like sometimes it can be like a little risky, right? You have
Yeah.
a stable job and then you want to do something, which is, there's a risk, right, to it. So what was your
Yeah.
feeling during that? And I guess what would you tell to people who are like maybe considering taking that kind of risk, taking a jump and say, I want to do my own startup or I want to do something similar to this? What would your advice be to them?
Yeah, so I think it was a calculated risk. I knew that I wanted to have some financial independence, right? So I knew that I wanted to work out of college and earn money and save money and invest it and get to a point where, when I was in my 20s, I always had it in my mind that like when you're in your 20s, you're kind of like new at this, like you do okay financially, but like the more you can save and invest, once you get into your 30s, you can start making like, and maybe even sooner, right? For some people, but like you can start making like decisions of self-interest, right? You can start taking risks and not worrying about it. So it's like I had saved enough money at that point where I knew like, okay, I believe in this, I'm going to do this. And if it doesn't work out, I have X amount of years before like I have to call it, right? And hopefully you never do, right? You want to have that success. But what I would say is build financial independence, be very disciplined with your finances. And then that allows you to take risks. They don't feel as risky, right? I mean, you could always go back and work at one of those big institutions at any time if you're good, right? And if you keep your relationships and don't burn any bridges and stuff like that. But it's just, yeah, set yourself up so that you can make those decisions and not worry about them.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So what would you say it takes to be a really successful CEO in your opinion? I guess some qualities. I mean, I know you have to be a good leader, right? But a lot of times stuff can sound cliche, like be a good leader,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
everybody. What would you say is like some really like unique stuff or unique things that would make you like a successful CEO in your opinion?
Yeah, I love that question. I love that you identified that, right? Like it sounds really great to say like be a leader, be inspiring. Like I can be the most inspiring person in the world, and if we don't make any money, like we're dead. Like you know
Right.
what I mean? Our
Yeah.
company will not be successful. So what I would say is and even just to say like be hardworking, right? I also think it's just given where you go to school, right? Like I would assume that most of you are very hardworking because you got there, right? But what will set you apart from someone else who's hardworking? I think it's you know, there's definitely a component of being ambitious and just like positive, optimistic, and like fully dedicated to something. But I think the bigger picture though is always understand the moving parts. Like you have to understand like what is your balance sheet? Like what are your expenses? Like what are we spending money on? Is it worth it? Are we getting an ROI on this? What works? What's ineffective? What doesn't work? Do we have the best, trading partnerships? Where can we cost money? I think it's just you have to think about everything. You have to constantly challenge your own beliefs. And when you work at an institution for a long time and your job becomes like, quote unquote, cushy, you think like, well, we did it that way and it always worked. And when you're in a startup, it's like you have to move faster than that. If 2, 3 months go by and you were doing it that way and it's not working, you have to just say like, no, it doesn't work. We have to try something else, right? So being adaptable, flexible, and just fully aware of every aspect of the business, what's hurting you, what's helping you, and just constantly adjusting. So, um, like detective work all day long, basically.
Yeah, wow. I mean,
And you have to be, and yeah, and you can't be a jerk, right? So it's good to
right.
be an inspiring leader. But I think like, um, it's like leadership is so interesting because I've been lucky. Like my first boss out of college was like awesome and always supported me and, always motivated me and like promoted me. And like, so I had it really good. And I think, and I had seen other leaders that were more like taking credit for the young people's work and like not letting them grow and whatever. So I do think it's also important as a leader, in terms of like what's a good leader, I think it's important to let people below you shine and like let people grow and have opportunities. In my last job, I remember there were like I worked there for a long time, and there was, changes of staff and stuff like that. But I had this team at one point that was like, I had already been there for like 10 years, and they were pretty young out of school. And I remember saying to my CEO at the time, like, all of them are better than all of us. Like, these kids are so much better than all of us. And like, we have to support them and let them thrive and shine, because they're actually going to figure things out that we never thought of. And, you have to have that, kind of like that type of personality to not have an ego, I guess.
That makes a lot of sense. So speaking of, I guess, hiring new people and saying the new generation, so
Yeah.
what would be the qualities that you would look for when you're hiring people, I guess, to as a CEO, like what technical skills, what kind of soft skills should
Yeah.
you bring to the table that would really make them stand out, like not just having good grades, going to a good school, but what else?
Yeah, and for what it's worth, like at the banks, most of the people that I worked with went to top schools. That's just how banks are. I mean, they say they're not, but then they are. You get there and you realize, like, wait, everybody went to like this kind of the same-ish schools. Um, and but I think when you work for like smaller companies, and some hedge funds obviously have like, pedigree, obsessions and things like that too. But I think when you work like I did, for companies that are like startups and they grow, I don't really care where you went to school, to be honest. Like, I want somebody who's smart. And I have worked with so many young kids that like just grew up, maybe not in this country, and their parents didn't have the finances to send them to good schools, and they just went wherever they got a full scholarship, and they're absolutely freaking brilliant, and they're just as good as like the kid with the degree from MIT. So for me, it's like, for sure, kind of like for sure technical skills, depending on the job that we're hiring for, but willingness to learn, like willingness to work, to work hard, to be creative, flexible, and, really take pride in wanting to be part of something, and growing, with the company itself. Um, I really like, I've always taken care of the younger people that I've hired over the years, because I think when you're hired for your first job, you kind of like go out into the world and then you do it. And a lot of times, like, it might not be what you want to do. You might want to do something else. And I think like supporting the career of young people is super important. So what I would say is also pick a company that cares about your growth and your future and sees you as like a big player, in terms of like the future of that firm. But yeah, I mean, what do I look for? Just, you can just tell when you meet the person, like they've done their homework about their company, or they've done their homework about my company, or they have ideas, or they make an attempt at least to have an idea. The ideas might be terrible, but they clearly like worked really hard to share something. And I'll tell you what, like of the last few interns I've had, and this, I had one he was a high school senior actually, and it was unclear to me whether he was clearly letting us know that, or if he was a freshman or whatever it was, but the kid was so hungry. He put together a portfolio of all of our funds, and, like gave me an analysis, and not ChatGPT. This was very much like his own, his own words, his own ideas and whatnot, like plugged in holes of products we didn't have, and like put this whole presentation together for the interview. Like, that nobody asked him to do it. He showed up and said, "Hey, here's what I've been working on. Here's what I think about your products. Here's like what I would do differently." And whatever. And I was so impressed with that level of, kind of like preparation for the job. And we ended up helping him get other internships and his final job. And then I've had interviews with people who have talked about products that are not ours, as if they were ours, or like just didn't have a sense of what our company does. So always study the company, the person. Like, I don't really care if somebody knows so much about me, but maybe you can be creative about like how you connect with someone in terms of connecting on some of the interests that you might think they have, or things that they talk about, whatever. We live in the world where you can like look everybody up and find everything out about every company. So yeah, just like thoughtful preparation goes a long way.
So what is one thing you would change, looking back in retrospect at your career that you think maybe I should have done this earlier, or I shouldn't have done this, something that you would have changed?
I, I don't want to sound cliche, but I have like really, really appreciated the path that I took. I think I learned all aspects of the business. So I spent some of my career learning about kind of like the back office operations and, kind of like how trades settle and all sorts of things. And then I saw the middle office aspect of it. I worked on, financing desks, the front office desks and things like this. So I think, I guess, I guess like, I think I had a really good background for the different jobs that I've had because I've learned the nuts and bolts of everything that goes into, the businesses that I've been in, right? What I would say though is there are so many interesting things that weren't like popular or um, as well known or within my reach maybe when I was younger. So for example, I think that people who work in I think private equity is an area of the market that is so interesting. You can have a very kind of like lucrative and interesting career working in private equity and, be at the forefront of like the coolest startups and whatnot. And now, I've had exposure to private equity firms because we started our own company. One of our investors is a kind of VC firm and just kind of like seeing what they do, and knowing that's out there. I think that's something I would have liked to spend some time doing earlier in my career. But for me, I'm just like super happy where I ended up. So I wouldn't change the path. The other thing I would say is if I were a young person, I would do what you're doing. I would be getting things out on YouTube. I would be involved in social media. I'd be trying to think of like cool ideas. I like 2 years ago or so, I had this young guy interview me because he was starting his own like podcast and he was going to kind of see where it goes from there. And this person is now like wildly famous, millions of followers, millions of dollars of income streaming. Like he's a finance influencer, right? And I think that that's a world that really didn't exist when I was younger. And I think, I'm running a company now. I don't really have time for it now. I do a lot of interviews with influencers and so I'm on the other side of the table. But I think if I were younger, like I would definitely be out there trying to educate people about finance markets. Like what you're doing now, I think is so cool and like keep it up. I think like that's an opportunity that a lot of people, kind of my age didn't have.
Thank you. I mean, you kind of answered my last question, which is one piece of advice you would give to kids wanting to pursue this career, or what we
Yeah.
can do right now. So I guess maybe, I mean, you kind of answered that already, but is there anything else that we could be doing right now that would like increase our chances of being able to have a successful career such as yours?
Yeah, take control of it early, right? I think when you're in high school, you study things and you get good grades and it's a race to get into college and build your resume to get into a good university, right? And then when you get into the university, you're kind of like on this rat race for the same thing, like get the top GPA, be the top of the class, do all these different things so that when Goldman comes on campus or XYZ hedge fund comes on campus, like you're the guy that they want to sit down with or the girl they want to sit down with. But I think, and all of that is like, that's probably innate. If you're a competitive person and you want some success, you're going to compete, of course. But what I would say is take more ownership of what you really like and learn about what you really like. Like again, talk to people, try to get internships, ask people about their jobs, ask people about like what is the job actually like, because you just don't learn this. I don't know if it's different, but when I was in university, like at Boston College, it was a great school, right? I learned a lot, econ, finance, but like I couldn't tell, like I was applying for these, like investment banking, Goldman, like that sounds good. I'll apply to that. Like hedge fund, that sounds good. I think really trying to like reach out to people along the way, asking them about their job, asking them what they do, and trying to get a sense of like, not to impress anyone or to get a job, but just to try to get a sense for yourself of like what you like. And does that actually sound interesting to you? Does that sound like something you want to do? I think is so important because a lot of times we just kind of graduate, we get jobs, and then we don't know where to go next. And I think, knowing what I know now, I would have been asking those questions, way earlier and trying to, make relationships in different parts of businesses to, just to have a different type of sense of like idea of what I wanted to do.
So I guess the final question would be you were talking about how that standout interview was when the high school senior, came to you with that presentation and you were really impressed. So
Yeah.
I guess the final question would be as like a resume, something in your resume that you write and then you give to them so they filter through a lot of different applicants. What is like one thing or a few things that would stand out to you specifically? Is it maybe, oh, they were part of a sports team, since you said that definitely being able to work well with others could be very important, but what would stand out to you specifically?
Yeah, I think in terms of the resumes, I mean, I try to I mean, this is like a crazy thing to say because sometimes it gets really overwhelming, but I try to, a lot of times in like now where I'm at, a lot of times it's like networking and somebody hey, this is my friend. Like, so going back to like talking to people, networking, getting to know people, that helps a lot because like when I send a resume on your behalf, like, hey, I did this Zoom meeting with Ethan and I thought he was great, talk to him, like the chances of that person talking to you are so much higher. So network, get to know people, have people sending emails for you is a great piece of advice, I think. But in terms of like, when I worked at my last job, we'd get thousands of resumes. Yeah, we always liked people who did sports. We liked people who um did other things, talked about doing other things like um I can't remember what it was, but there was like one kid that was like a champion curler, and I didn't know what curling was, and so I just brought him in because I wanted to learn about curling. There have been resumes where people talk about their interest in deep sea fishing. Like I think just like stand out in some way. The school is the school, and that's great, but just do stuff like do different things and make the resume look interesting to read, right? When they all look the same, it's kind of like, okay, next, right? But also, again, I think for anyone out there, who isn't getting accepted to MIT or Harvard next year or Boston College or Notre Dame or whatever, UVA, like if you are well spoken, if you've done your homework, if you're smart, you understand the business and you're willing to work and you make a great impression in an interview, I think you're gonna, you have a really good shot, as good of a shot as a kid from an Ivy League school that kind of like doesn't do those things. So it's so much about the personality you bring and what you put into it, the preparation that you put into it. And I like, for me, and this could also be my personality too, right? People might have a completely different view on this, but I'm so much more interested in like, if you kind of like have the basic skills and the education, I know that you're probably going to be smart enough to do the job, right? I'm so much more interested in like a unique, interested, motivated personality. Because I'm gonna have to sit next to that person and talk to them every day. And so, yeah, I want them to be smart, but I also really appreciate, just bringing some like diversity and personality into it too.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Miss
You're
Sylvia
welcome.
Jablonski from Defiance ETFs. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I hope this was helpful.